The winter of 1978 in Chicago was unforgiving. The wind came off Lake Michigan like a physical blow, freezing the city into a gray, icy stillness. But in the affluent suburb of River Forest, the cold was about to be replaced by a different kind of chill, a chill born of pure, calculated terror. On a quiet street lined with mansions and old-growth trees, a house stood empty. It was a sprawling residence, a symbol of wealth and power, but to a group of small-time burglars, it looked simply like an opportunity. They watched the house from a parked car, their breath misting on the windows. They knew the owners were away in California, escaping the brutal Midwest winter. They saw a dark house, a silent alarm system they believed they could bypass, and a vault likely filled with cash and jewelry. What they did not see, what they were catastrophically blind to, was the invisible shadow that loomed over that property. They did not see the decades of blood that had paid for the bricks and mortar. They did not realize that by stepping onto that lawn, they were not just breaking a law, they were signing their own death warrants. The house belonged to Anthony Accardo. To his neighbors, he was a retired beer salesman and a grandfather. To the FBI, the Chicago Police Department, and the criminal underworld, he was Joe Batters, the Big Tuna, the chairman of the board of the Chicago outfit. He was the man who had started as Al Capone's bodyguard and risen to become the most powerful and feared godfather in American history. And on this freezing January night, a group of thieves was about to make the last mistake of their lives. The break-in itself was almost insultingly simple. The crew, led by a burglar named John Mendel, managed to disable the alarm and pry open a window. They moved through the darkened rooms, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. They found the master bedroom. They found the walk-in closet. They ransacked the place with the adrenaline-fueled sloppiness of amateurs. They took cufflinks, gold watches, and heirlooms. They didn't find millions in cash, but they found enough to think they had scored. They left the house carrying bags of stolen goods, high-fiving each other, believing they had pulled off a clean job. In the days that followed, the silence in the underworld was deafening. It was the calm before a tsunami. When Tony Accardo returned from his vacation in Indian Wells to find his sanctuary violated, his reaction was not the explosive rage of Al Capone. It was something far more terrifying. He walked through the shattered remains of his home. He looked at the empty spaces where his personal items had been. He didn't scream. He didn't throw furniture. He simply picked up the phone and called his associates. Then, he sat down and waited for the police. When the detectives from the River Forest Police Department arrived, they found Accardo sitting calmly in his living room. He was a man of few words, dressed impeccably, radiating an aura of absolute control. The officers asked him the standard questions. Did he know who might have done this? Did he have any enemies? Was there anyone who held a grudge against him? Accardo looked at the officers, and then he smiled. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator looking at prey that doesn't yet know it is dead. He told the officers, in a voice devoid of emotion, that he had no idea who would do such a thing. He claimed he was just a retired businessman with no enemies. He declined to file a formal complaint. He declined to list the missing items in detail. He told them, politely but firmly, that he would handle the insurance matters himself. The police left the house feeling a cold dread settle in their stomachs. They knew what that smile meant. They knew that the investigation was over before it began, and that the sentencing phase had already commenced. Tony Accardo had just issued a silent verdict, and the penalty was going to be medieval. The word hit the street within 24 hours. Someone had robbed the boss. The panic that swept through the Chicago underworld was palpable. It wasn't just fear, it was disbelief. Robbing Tony Accardo was like trying to mug the devil in his own living room. It wasn't just a crime, it was an act of suicide. The burglars, Mendel and his crew, heard the whispers. They realized, with sickening clarity, whose house they had hit. The euphoria of the score evaporated, replaced by a terror so profound it made it hard to breathe. They tried to fix it. In a desperate attempt to reverse the clock, they attempted to return some of the stolen items. But in the world of the Chicago outfit, there is no undo button. Disrespect had been shown. The sanctity of the boss's home, the place where his wife and children slept, had been breached. To let them live, even if they returned every single diamond, would be a sign of weakness. And Tony Accardo had survived 50 years in the Mafia by never, ever showing weakness. The hunt began. It was not a frantic search. It was a methodical, corporate operation. Accardo delegated the task to his top enforcers, men like Anthony Spilatro and Joseph Lombardo. The order was clear: find them and make an example of them that will last for 100 years. The message needed to be so brutal that even the thought of crossing the Accardo family would induce nightmares in the toughest criminals. The first to fall was John Mendel. He disappeared in mid-January. He wasn't found for weeks. When he was finally discovered, the condition of his body told a story of prolonged, agonizing suffering. He was found in the trunk of a car on the south side. The medical examiner's report was a catalogue of horrors. He had been beaten, burned, and stabbed. But the specific detail that made the seasoned homicide detectives turn away in disgust was the mutilation. His throat had been cut from ear to ear, the classic Sicilian sign for a canary, or someone who talked. But worse, he had been castrated. The removal of his manhood was the ultimate symbol of the disrespect he had shown. He had tried to be a big man by robbing the boss, and the boss had taken his masculinity as the price. This was not a random act of violence. It was a signature. It was Accardo smiling. One by one, the crew vanished. Steve Garcia was next. Then Vincent Moretti. The pattern was identical. They would disappear, and days or weeks later, they would be found in the trunks of cars, or in alleyways, their bodies subjected to the same grotesque ritual. The castration became the calling card of this specific purge. It was a psychological weapon. It told the streets that Accardo didn't just kill you, he erased you. He took your life, your dignity, and your identity. The terrifying efficiency of the outfit was on full display. They didn't just kill the burglars, they killed anyone associated with the job. A fence who had unknowingly bought some of the stolen cufflinks was found dead. A driver who had waited in the car was found dead. In total, within 6 months, at least 7 men connected to the burglary were brutally executed. The Chicago Police Department watched in helpless fascination. They knew exactly who was ordering the hits. They knew exactly why these men were dying. But they couldn't stop it, and they couldn't prove it. Tony Accardo remained in his River Forest mansion, the very house that had been robbed. He went about his daily routine. He watered his lawn. He played with his grandchildren. He attended Mass. When reporters dared to ask him about the string of slayings, he would give them that same impenetrable look, that same faint, chilling smile, and say he knew nothing about the affairs of criminals. He was untouchable. To understand how a man could order such savagery while living the life of a suburban grandfather, you have to understand the history of Tony Accardo. He was not like the modern gangsters who sought fame and flashed their wealth. He was a student of Al Capone, but he had learned from Capone's mistakes. Capone loved the limelight, Accardo loved the shadows. Capone went to prison for tax evasion. Accardo never spent a single night in jail for a felony conviction in his entire life. Accardo earned the nickname Joe Batters from Capone himself. In the 1920s, 3 mobsters had betrayed the organization. Capone invited them to a dinner, and after the meal, Accardo, then just a young bodyguard, beat them to death with a baseball bat. Capone was so impressed by the young man's ferocity and stamina that he reportedly said, "This kid is a real Joe Batters." The name stuck. It was a badge of honor that signified his capacity for extreme, hands-on violence. But as Accardo aged, he evolved. He moved from the baseball bat to the boardroom table. He restructured the Chicago outfit into a streamlined, highly profitable business empire. He insulated himself with layers of buffers. By 1978, he was the ultimate authority, the capo di tutti capi in all but name. He didn't need to hold the bat anymore. He just needed to nod. The robbery in 1978 was an affront to this carefully constructed aura of invincibility. It suggested that he was getting old, that he was losing his grip. That is why the retaliation had to be so extreme. It was a corrective measure. It was a public service announcement to the underworld: the big tuna is still the shark. The investigation into the murders of the burglars went nowhere. Witnesses developed sudden amnesia. Evidence disappeared. The fear of Accardo was far greater than the fear of the law. The surviving criminals in Chicago looked at the photos of the castrated bodies in the newspapers, and they learned the lesson well. You could rob a bank. You could rob a store. You could even rob another gangster. But you did not touch the home of Tony Accardo. There is a chilling anecdote from the investigation. One of the burglars, before he was caught, actually managed to get a message to the outfit, begging for mercy. He offered to do anything, to pay 10 times the value of the stolen goods, to kill anyone they wanted. The response he received was silence. There was no negotiation. In Accardo's world, mercy was a concept that applied to family, not to enemies. Once the line was crossed, the consequence was absolute. The brutality of the castration murders served another purpose. It cemented Accardo's legacy in his final years. He lived for another decade after the robbery, dying of natural causes in 1992 at the age of 86. He died in his own bed, surrounded by his family, a free man. The men who had broken into his house had been rotting in the ground for 14 years, their names largely forgotten, remembered only as the fools who tugged on the tiger's tail. The story of the 1978 burglary is often cited by criminologists and historians as the definitive example of the Chicago outfit's power structure. It showed that the police were mere spectators in a war between criminals. It showed that justice, in the eyes of the Mafia, is swift, cruel, and disproportionate. When the police had originally interviewed Accardo in his living room, they had noted his calm demeanor. They had noted the lack of anger. At the time, they thought he was in shock. In hindsight, they realized it was supreme confidence. He didn't need the police to find the men. He had an army. He didn't need a judge to sentence them. He was the judge. And he didn't need a prison to punish them. He had a trunk and a knife. The legend of Joe Batters is usually associated with the baseball bat incidents of the 1920s. But the true darkness of the man is found in the 1970s. It is found in that smile. The smile that masked a mind capable of ordering the systematic mutilation of 7 men over a few stolen trinkets. It wasn't about the jewelry. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. In the end, the thieves who robbed Tony Accardo didn't just lose their lives. They were used as canvas for a gruesome masterpiece of intimidation. They were turned into messages. And the message was clear. The king stays the king, and the king's castle is sacred. Those who violated it were not just killed, they were unmade. They were stripped of everything that made them men, leaving behind only a gory warning for the next fool who might think that an empty house in River Forest was an easy score. Accardo's ability to smile in the face of the detectives, knowing full well that the machinery of death was already grinding into motion, is perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire affair. It was the ultimate deception. To the world, he was the victim of a crime. To the underworld, he was the god of vengeance. And as the bodies piled up in the trunks of cars across Chicago, that smile remained the last thing the city remembered of the incident. A smile that said everything and nothing at all.